Hello, I'm Susan Vansickle. I'm the director here at Christian Adoption Consultants. Today we wanted to talk to you about when to say yes in adoption. One of the hardest issues many couples come to face with in the adoption process is knowing when to say yes in adoption. This often comes up after the home study is complete, the profile is created, and the fundraising is happening. In the beginning of the adoption process, the pathway is pretty clear. Hire a home study worker, fill out those forms, check those boxes, get the fingerprints and the physicals and the baby items. It's relatively easy to check the boxes and do what you need to do. But then a couple comes to a stage in the adoption process when they begin to review situations, an expectant mother who would like to make an adoption plan for their child. It often includes information like the gender of the baby, the due date, and social and medical history of the expectant family. And it's at this point that a hopeful adoptive parent decides if they want to present their profile. And when and if they do, that's their 100% commitment to raise this child as their own if chosen. This is also the point when it's easy for hopeful adoptive parents to become incredibly anxious and freak out about saying yes to the right situation. So how do you know when to present to a situation? How do you know if this is the baby God has for you? And how do you know you're not missing your baby? It's first good to consider the value of wisdom. When deciding if you're going to present to a certain situation, one of the first things you want to do is gather all of the important information. Ensure you have all the significant information involved, the social and medical history, the birth father information, a breakdown of fees, etc. Educate yourself on any medical or legal issues that might impact this match. During this step, it's critical that you're working with trusted, ethical agencies and attorneys that not only are serving you well, but also provide expectant and birth parent care and counseling, both pre and post-birth. An adoption consultant can also help you weigh any possible risks involved and walk through each of these steps to help you decide if it's a good fit for your family. It can be invaluable to have someone who's neutral to help you with this part of the process. Another thing to consider is the myth of control. It's easy to think you have a tremendous amount of control in adoption. And in some ways, it's true. You decide when to begin the adoption process, you complete the paperwork, and even check those dozens of boxes pertaining to openness and medical history and preferences. You analyze the situation and educate yourself as much as possible. You decide to present. But you inevitably come to the point where you're left waiting on a situation to come through and ultimately to be chosen. We call control the lie of adoption because the truth is there's very little control you can have in this process, like so much of life. Ultimately, an expectant or birth mother chooses the adoptive family. You realize you simply can't check all of the boxes for your preferences in life. After you've done your part, weighed all the important information, and decided if you want to present, you realize that there's only so much you can do. And finally, it's important to remember the truth of God's sovereignty. Once you come to terms with the lack of control you feel in the process, your frustration can also swing the other way. You can think the control is all in someone else's hands. The birth families choosing adoptive families, the adoption agency serving you, or even the idea of waiting for fate or good karma. But God is ultimately in charge. He is writing a grand redemptive story in history that He's invited us to be a part of, to reflect His glory right here on earth. God has woven the story of adoption throughout the gospel and invites us to be a part of it as well. He's known the details of your days and your child's from the beginning of time. No one can thwart His plans or stand in their way. There's tremendous freedom found in not just believing in God's complete control, but truly resting there. So practically, where does this leave you? When you're wrestling with the tension of balancing earthly wisdom and common sense with godly faith, which I believe are both gifts from God, what does this actually look like? Honestly, I don't have the answer. And I think it looks different for each couple and individual desperate for God's will in their lives. Some families have a gut about presenting to one situation or another. Some, after reading through the details, know pretty quickly that a certain situation just isn't a good fit for them. And others decide a very clear direction one way or another from God. My experience is that most families generally don't have a tremendous amount of clarity or feel 100% on most situations they see. But in my work for over a decade with hopeful adoptive parents, I've seen some families have incredible peace during the process of deciding when to present. Do you want to know their secret? Here it is. They decide to walk through every open door that God opens and pray that he slams it shut if it's not his will. It's that simple. Ultimate trust in the one who has all the control, faith in the author of good stories, hope in the God who promises to do immeasurably more than all we can ask or imagine. A wholehearted yes on the table before God with the courage to put it into action. Can I be honest about something else? I actually don't think there's a perfect situation out there for you. Adoption is always born from brokenness, and the perfect scenario means a child is always meant to be with their birth family. But of course, we live in a broken world where sometimes that's not possible or best. We live in a world touched by infertility and substance use and unhealthy relationships and hundreds of other broken things. So the idea of ideal quickly goes out the window. But I do believe there's a perfect situation for you. And what I mean is that I believe God is sovereign over everything, and that includes putting families together. So while there's no ideal or perfect scenario or situation, I strongly believe that God has the perfect match for an adoptive family. That there's a perfect baby that fits perfect and is divinely ordained to be placed within a specific family. So how do you find joy in the midst of waiting? How do you know when to say yes? And how do you make sure it all works out in the end? God will not let you miss your baby. You can rest in his perfect plan, and your job is simply to say yes to him.